welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here on the program. Every time we get together, it is always a new guest and a new conversation, with or without a book, locally, nationally, internationally. It's always a lot of fun. My goodness, when I think about international, I think about many of the countries where many of our guests have come from. Of course, many here in the United States. We've gone to South America, Central America. Matter of fact, just recently I spoke with a woman who was coming to us from Moscow, Australia, and India, and I think we've even had one or two from the African continent and so forth. So we're, without a doubt, global. And we certainly hope that you will listen to our program that comes your way Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and Wednesdays at 9 a.m. That's our special edition of Tell Me Your Story. Our program today is going to focus on the mindful way to unlock your creative self. We all have that creative spark within us. It's just how that manifests. What is it that you're creative at? We're going to talk with the author of Core Creativity, Dr. Ronald Alexander. And I want to thank you so much, Dr. Ron, for joining us here on the program. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Of course, you're just down the road from us here. I'm coming to you folks from Santa Barbara, California, but you are down in Los Angeles. I take it that's your home base.
Yep. Yes. Been here about 45 years now.
Wow. So you've obviously seen a lot of changes, not only in the city of Los Angeles and obviously California and so forth. I'm originally from the Phoenix, Arizona area, born and raised. For 46 years I lived there. And I said, okay, that's enough of the heat. I'm moving.
Good choice. Good choice.
Well, I'll tell you, when we talk about this aspect of creativity, it sometimes takes a little creative energy to move one's self, both physically as well as mentally and emotionally and spiritually. How did you begin this journey focusing on creativity, and then, of course, with this outgrowth of this book called Core Creativity?
Well, it really, do you like to be called Rich or Richard?
Richard's good.
Yeah, Richard. There's 3 points of the origin for this book. You know, it's been almost 5.5 decades in the making. I grew up in Boston, and so as an adolescent, I would hitchhike into Boston from the suburbs on weekends, and I was very interested in existential philosophy, and I would sit on Saturday and Sunday afternoon in the Harvard bookstore in Cambridge and in Harvard Square and read books on existential philosophy. And then one day I happened to fall on an aisle, and I saw all these books on Zen Buddhism. And so I started reading about Zen in between reading about existential philosophy. And then at night, because I was in Harvard Square, there was a very famous folk club called the Club 47. And then down the street, there was another famous rock club called the Psychedelic Supermarket. And all the groups from England would come over, like Cream, The Who, Led Zeppelin, The Stones, The Beatles. So I would catch all these acts before they were really, well known. I even saw the Rolling Stones for $1.50 once. Last time I went, I think I paid $7.50 a ticket.
Wow.
And so I would go at night and take in all the music clubs. And then, of course, I did what most of the kids did in the 60s, is I got a guitar and joined a group with 2 other very gifted musicians, and we played. And so I really immersed myself both in Zen philosophy, existential philosophy, and in music, and really immersed myself in listening to all of the absolutely creative and cutting-edge music groups of the time. So then you fast forward out to California, graduate school, I come down to Los Angeles. And in the very first year, I was doing my private practice in the Cedars-Sinai Medical Office Towers adjacent to the hospital. And I started just seeing young musicians and, renowned musicians and filmmakers, screenwriters, directors to be, back then, many of them were just starting out, cutting their teeth in commercials and sitcom television. And then they went on to garner great success. And so I had the unique opportunity to, really firsthand be in the trenches with what I call in the book core creativity, core creatives. And I was able to not only in music, but television, film, and then as time unfolded, the .com industry started reaching out to me because I do a lot of work on both creativity consulting and leadership coaching. And so a lot of the people in Silicon Valley, like I've consulted for Apple, Sun Microsystems, Snapchat, which is down here in LA, started reaching out to me, and they really wanted me to engage them both with talent, but also with many of their executives to sometimes solve various kinds of creative issues or issues around communication or conflict management. And so that's how I got started. In the book, of course, part 3 is that in the last 20 years, I took, a very deep dive at being able to sit with very renowned people, some of the members of Fleetwood Mac, U2, filmmakers like Amy Ziering. She's in the book. She's an Academy Award documentarian who did The Hunting Ground and Allen versus Farrow documentary, and many, many other documentaries. And young artists, actors like Cody Firm from House of Cards, Jody Long from New York City is in the book. She was on Broadway at age 7 with Sidney Lumet. And then fast forward, she graduates from Purchase College in upstate New York. And she gets an offer to be in a play, Loose Change, with Kevin Kline and Patricia Richardson. She's the actress from the Home Improvement show, amongst other things. She's got a whole list of wonderful accomplishments. And so in the last 20 years, I really have taken a deep dive interviewing these folks, counseling some of them, consulting to some of their organizations to really understand what's the creativity process from the inside out, and what kinds of daily rituals do core creatives have? What are things that they find helpful to do? What are the things that they don't find helpful to do to stimulate their own creative process? And there are many daily rituals that they all do.
Well, now I'm curious to just be a creative person. It's a pretty cool thing. I consider myself to be one of those creative people. But how does being a core creative, and I can't think of any other phrase to use other than this, set one apart from just the creative? And again, we're not looking here to subdivide things and put things in boxes. But what's, I guess, maybe the better way to ask the question, what's the difference between a creative and a core creative person?
I would say a core creative person just takes things one step deeper. And before they embark on anything that involves creative output, is they oftentimes spend a considerable amount of time in daily self-reflection. Some call it self-reflection, some call it listening to the creative reverie emerge from the inside. Some of the core creatives call it that they take time to meditate every day. Some of them are very Taoist. For example, Steve Jobs, he did the daily Taoist walk. And whenever he had a design issue, or like he was going to hire somebody really important for the company, he'd often take a half hour, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour walk with that person, because something would open up inside of him at a very deep and intuitive level. So core creatives, they not only respect their intuition, but they hone it. And they utilize their intuition as their primary counsel of what I call in the book core creativity, the counsel of support, or how they listen to their own inner creativity pod. Because core creatives oftentimes, not only do they have an inner creativity pod, but most have an outer creativity pod where they have 1, 2, 5, 7 people that they interact with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to bounce things off of. So there's a mix between listening to your intuition and waiting for the muse to arrive, and consulting with other creatives and having them sandpaper, polish, throw up against the wall, and fine-tune some of your own creative ideas.
We are talking with Dr. Ronald Alexander. He's the author of his current release, which is Core Creativity, the Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self. And he is with us here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host of Tell Me Your Story, as we bring you new paradigms for a new world, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And Dr. Ronald, I want to say that one of the elements that you have just touched upon is one of those elements that we promote on this program. I usually go through about a minute and a half little statement of when we're on, where we're on, how you can find us, and so forth. But one of them has to do with encouraging people to participate in what I started promoting back in September of 2019 as, at that time, the upcoming year of Perfect Vision 2020. And then when we hit 2021, it became the decade of Perfect Vision, where we would encourage people to go within.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, is the only place that you will, no matter what your visual acuity is, you will always get 20/20 vision by listening to that still, small voice. But it's, and I've often joked with people about this, I say, it's not enough to just listen to the still, small voice. You also need, if you're going to listen, to follow the promptings of that still, small voice. Let's talk a little bit about that inner life that we all need to cultivate. You made the comment that core creatives, they hone the skill of doing so. And for me, I would have experiences, and this is now going back 25, 35 years, in Phoenix when I bicycled everywhere until I was 36 years of age. And I'd get this prompting, okay, Richard, you need to turn right at the next intersection. If I turn right at the next intersection, now I'm questioning, that's going to take me 3 miles out of my way. Turn right at the next intersection. There was no response to my query. It was just a repeat.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going 3 miles out of my way. So I pass that intersection. I go a half a mile. The prompting gets stronger and stronger and stronger. I finally, believe it or not, I turned around and I went back to that intersection.
Yes.
And I made what would have been a right turn, in this case a left. I went the 3 miles out of my way, got back on the path I was originally on, and got to work. Now, I don't know if I avoided an accident or if I was involved in or being used as part of the old the butterfly effect. Okay, if you keep going down this way, this is going to happen. But if you go this way, then you will have changed the universe in some profound manner. But I came to the conclusion, doctor, that it wasn't about any of that. My still small voice was basically saying to me, all right, you're listening, I get that. But do you trust me? Do you really trust me? And now I don't take it for granted, mind you, but now it's like second nature. I get that problem. Okay, boom, I go. I make the right. I don't question it. What I love are the responses to my query, which should I got a fork in the road here, literally. Which way should I go? And I will get doesn't matter. Go whichever way you feel like you want to go, you can go. And then there are other times, which way should I go? At the same fork, go left. Next day, go ahead and go right. And sometimes it takes me into heavy traffic where I guess I'm supposed to learn patience a little bit more, or, who knows? All I know is that still small voice is critical to my flowing in life. Talk to us about your experiences and then why the core creative individual, and then maybe even talk about how a core creative individual hones that, shall we call it a skill?
Yes. Yeah. And Richard, I think what you just described is very, very spot on. And it's a wonderful example of how you see, and I would label you as a core creative, that you listen to the inner silent voice. And most importantly is you trust it. Now, one of the things that's really important that I write about in the book is there's a time to sort out listening to your intuition and listening to the anxious voice that might be filled with desire, or what we call in Buddhist psychology, wanting mind, that sometimes instructs you to do things that you think are coming from your intuition, but they really aren't. And I'll give you a couple of positive stories and a couple of not so positive stories on intuition that involve myself and some people I've worked with. So when I was finishing up undergraduate studies at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, I had a dream. And I was trying to decide, well, do I go to grad school on the West Coast or do I go on the East Coast? And being from Boston, there's always this kind of old Yankee, East Coast is much more sophisticated intellectually than the West Coast. So I had a dream. And in my senior year, and the dream was that I was riding in a covered wagon, and I was with my girlfriend, and we were like cowboys, and we were going up over the Sierra Nevadas, and we looked down, and we could see the Golden Gate Bridge. We had gone through the Donner Pass in the dream, and I turned in to my girlfriend in the dream, and we both said at the same time, "There's gold in them there hills." And then I very vividly, saw the Golden Gate Bridge. And I realized in that moment several things. One is that my intuition was telling me I would have a very golden career, which I ended up having if I were to go west rather than east. Mm-hmm. And that I was in a covered wagon, which was, I'm covered. My intuition was saying, we've got you covered. We're telling you, go west. So that's a positive example of listening to one's intuition. So fast forward to 2008. It's September. I'm down in Australia, and I'm on a teaching tour, teaching workshops, training therapists, teaching mindfulness, Gestalt Therapy, and Somatic Experiencing Therapy. And I wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, and the dream that I had was stock market crashes, worst crash since 1929. And so I get up, and because of the time difference, I call my financial broker, and I say, look at the dream that I had. I think we should get out of the market. And, very sizable portfolio too. And he says to me in a very arrogant way, Dr. Ron, if I listen to everybody who had a dream or went to a psychic or a gypsy, I think their portfolios would be a mess. So, needless to say, I didn't listen to my intuition. I let him keep me in the market, and everything went to hell in a handbasket for all of us. Fortunately, I did listen to my gut that said, "Don't panic, just ride it through." Now, anytime he talks, he says to me, the same financial manager, "Hey, have you had any more dreams lately?" or images about what's happening in the market. So that's an example of when we don't listen to our intuition. Mm-hmm. And then I was having lunch with a former executive who had been involved in one of the greatest media empires in history for many, like 3 decades. And then he decided that there was an offer to merge with another company, his media company with another company. And instead of reaching out to an extended council of support and taking a pulse on whether or not he should get involved with this media merger, and particularly he was feeling pressured in his head, not his gut, that because of companies were merging with internet companies and the internet was the wave of the future, his mind kept telling him that he should go ahead with this. And so I said to him, "So how did you make the decision?" Because the decision turned out to be catastrophically bad. And he had to leave the company, and it was just one of the worst mergers in history. And I said, "How did you make that decision?" Because, I was really curious about his process as a creative, as an executive, because this was a guy who had an incredible talent and intuition for how to run a company like a Swiss watch, a media company, highly respected all over the world. And he said, "Well, Ron, I took a walk in the woods by myself, and my head was saying go with it, but my stomach was saying don't." So there's another example of that. As individuals, the instrumentation that our bodies, our somatic senses of self, they're always giving us information, just like you at the fork in the road, and you decide to go back and to go left. In shamanic time, interestingly enough, they always say when there's a right fork and a left fork, in shamanic time, you're always supposed to go left rather than to go right, because metaphorically, the right way, the right thing. And in shamanic time, instead of the right way, it's better to do the right thing rather than to do things right. And so what we listen to at the subtler level, both in shamanic time and as core creatives, is that voice of the inner reverie. It's like a compass. And oftentimes somatically, it's really loud. Sometimes it screams at us. Like, I know sometimes when someone calls me and wants me to consult, like someone just called from Hong Kong the other day and is having a great difficulty in their business because of the shutdown. And at every point in the conversation, I kept getting, even though he was really in a panic about losing, his company was losing $2.4 million a month on these hotel businesses. I had this abiding, calm feeling that he was going to get through this. And so, in a very sincere way, I said, "I think you just need to trust that success is formulaic in business and that you're a creative. Look at this dynasty that you've created over the last 20 years of your life. And instead of challenging yourself in questioning and rethinking, your current decision take a look at all the good decisions you've made creatively at every step, at every fork of the road. And let's compare them just for a couple of minutes against some of the not so good decisions that you've been having to make in the last 2 years because of COVID. And he immediately relaxed and he started to chuckle and he said, God, Dr. Ron, you're right. I have had a formula for success and I've been guided by an intuitive compass. I guess I have to reconnect to that compass. And I said, yes, you do. And I said, that's going to get you through these very difficult storms. And the ship of yourself and the ship of your companies set sail. We're going to move forward in the next 4 to 6 months. We're going to tighten up your belt. I went through all his expenses and corporate employees. Going to have to lay off some people for temporarily. And these are the changes you're going to make. And then creatively, you and I, over the next 12 weeks, we're going to start to invent together, envision together a new future for your companies, given that right now China has you in a complete lockdown. So it's really important that people respect their intuition and that they learn to separate out intuition from mind talk, because mind talk oftentimes gets us in trouble. And mind talk could be as simple as you go to the gym and a couple of the business guys, they're on the life cycle and they're telling you about all these hot new stock deals. And your gut tells you no, 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 no. But mind talk gets you into desire. Oh, God, what if I bought those stocks that they're talking about? And on and on and on, which is a story of the mind, rather than that already, just in the couple of minutes you've been listening to them, you start feeling tightness in your stomach or tension in your neck, or you start getting in your mind's eye, the space between your two eyebrows, your third eye, we call it in metaphysics. You start getting a big N and a big O. To listen to that, to respect that.
Well, you know, it's again one of those things that we talk about on a regular basis. There are interviews that I do. I get to the end of the interview, and I'm going, doggone it, I wanted to bring that area up in terms of our intuition because it would be very important. So, we need to have you back to talk more about this from the intuition perspective. And it's not because I wasn't listening to my inner voice. It was because, as I often say, this program, the universe asks the questions. I'm just along for the ride. And yet I have a very curious mind. I'm always asking what some might consider to be rather idealistic and naive kinds of questions. I prefer it that way simply because there's somebody else out there who is pondering and asking the same kinds of questions. That I'm not. I am not the originator of many of these. I've had experiences where I will present an idea. And I even had this experience where I presented this one concept that I had drawn out on the back of one of my business cards, and I shared it with the gentleman who was giving the lecture. And then I called up to set up an interview with this gentleman, and I got his go-between, his receptionist, if you will. I guess actually some of them would call it the bulldog, so to speak. I shared this with her, and she, oh, no, he will not talk about that. And I'm thinking, well, why not? What's the big deal? Well, we don't want that information falling into the wrong hands because that information could be used in a destructive form. And I'm thinking, what, I'm the only person in the universe who found this, who realized this is how this works? Anyway, we did actually talk about it in the interview. He didn't have a problem with it, and he understood because that's how he did what he did, was using this general process, if you will. So I love that aspect of continuing to follow and listen to one's intuition. And I would venture, and I want to talk about this as we continue, I would venture that we have that capacity from birth, but it's as we start growing up the institutions that we are exposed to as we are growing tell us just the opposite. And we'll talk
Yes.
about that. Core creativity, the mindful way to unlock your creative self. Dr. Ronald Alexander is my guest, and you are listening to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Dr. Ronald Alexander is my guest, and he has not only this particular work that is just newly released, Core Creativity. That's the title of the book. Oh, the website. Why? It's corecreativity.com. And I'm sure that it is also available on Amazon and many of the other outlets. He also has another book out, widely acclaimed book called Wise Mind, Open Mind. And I'll share with you one experience of someone I met back in, I'm going to say the 1980s, and I was working for I'm going to call it a religious radio station, because in addition to evangelical fundamentalist ministers and pastors like your Jerry Falwells, your Kenneth Copelands, and so on and so forth, I was actually astounded that they had Louis Farrakhan on the station at the same time.
Wow.
I was dumbfounded because of some of the things he said. But I met this gentleman. He was an elderly gentleman who was doing a program, and he would call in on the phone to do his show. His name, I'm sure he's passed on by now because he was an elderly gentleman back then. His name was Clyde Freeman. And he told me, and the listeners, that he would love to talk to people. He loved debating, he loved conversing, but he would only talk to you from the standpoint of what he referred to as the Thus Saith the Lord Scriptures. I thought, okay, well, that's an interesting distinction, but all right, fine. But he shared with me off the air once, and we were having a wonderful conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, Richard, I want to tell you something. My mind is closed to the point that it remains open. And I thought, that's, number one, an interesting turn of a phrase, but that is pretty brave of an individual who has a particular philosophical bent and yet is willing to stay open, unlike many people in this world today. They've already made up their mind about, whatever the subject matter is. You are not going to convince them otherwise. And so you might as well just, make like a leaf and blow or leave. But that is not something we're born with. I wanted to dive into this, that from the time we leave our mother's womb until 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, we're tapped into that voice, that inner voice, aren't we? And
Yes.
institutions, they chip away until we don't trust anymore.
Yeah, excellent point, Richard. And there's a couple of points I want to respond to that you brought up that are excellent. One is two of the most formative buzzkills in detours that occur for us in our culture around stifling our creative sense of self and really allowing for the magical child's mind to continuously unfold into what we call in creativity thinking ongoing flow in peak states. Is first and foremost, it's the parents. And I'll give you an example. A family I was working with, they brought their little boy into the office because they couldn't have a babysitter. And I was doing couples therapy with the mom and dad. And the little boy starts walking around my office, and he starts talking to me on his imaginary iPhone. And the mother turns to him and says, "Oh, I'm making up the name. Billy, stop that. There's no phone." And so I immediately pick up my hand and I put my imaginary iPhone to my ear and I start having a conversation, imaginary phone to imaginary phone with Billy. Okay, positive mirroring. Instant rapport with the kid. The kid started, smiling and laughing, and he came over and he wanted to sit on my lap. In the home I grew up in, a big old Irish Catholic family from Boston, creativity was not regarded. And I was very intuitive. And at times, as a child, I was very psychic. Like I knew when someone was going to die, and I would tell my mother and she'd poo-poo it. I would also have a sense. I was in 2 very bad accidents as a kid. One where I injured my knee, and another where I broke my legs playing soccer. And I remember before I left each morning, I told my mother that day that I had a bad feeling that something was going to happen. And she, again, just poo-pooed it. So parents are one of the primary buzzkills for the core creatives, healthy development. And then second, in some school settings, well, one would say most, is schools administrations, their curriculums, the teachers. It's all anti-creativity. It's all about this is the way that it should be. Mm-hmm. And I'll give a positive example, though. When I transferred from a private Catholic school in Boston, where I was getting A's in French and A's in English, and everything was very fixed, in a private school, oftentimes in Boston, you operate in what we call in creativity thinking, very fixed mindsets. And one of the distinctions that I write about in the book is core creatives are constantly breaking fixed mindsets, and they're operating in fluid, flow, and peak mindsets. So that's a really important distinction. Mm. And so I got to a place in the public school system in Boston when we transferred, where I had a music teacher. And the music teacher, instead of giving us a lesson plan, used to ask us, well, in the classroom, look around, see all the instruments. Why don't you just spend time and go to what instruments you're drawn to, play them as long as you want, and then move on to another instrument. So there's a absolute fantastic example of that music teacher didn't know that she was a core creative, but she was a core creative because she was saying to us, don't develop any fixed mindsets around music and around creativity. Experiment. Yeah. And creatives are terrific at setting sail for the unknown, setting sail for what they don't know and what they have yet to discover.
There is a beautiful little song by Harry Chapin, and the chorus goes, and the teacher said, "Flowers are red, young man. Green leaves are green. There's no way to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen." But the little boy said, "There are so many colors in the rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors in the flowers, and I see every one." And this is because this boy went to school and they were to paint flowers, and he was going crazy with the 120 colors out of the crayon box. And the teacher said, "Oh, no. So this goes on for a while, and she throws him into the corner saying, "You're being sassy," and so forth. Well, down the road, they end up going to another town, and then he goes to another school. And he's painting flowers in neat rows of green and red. Teacher comes up, and she says, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm painting flowers the way they've always been seen." And then she says the words that he said to his first teacher, "But there are so many colors in the rainbow." And this is what happens. I mean, I was born and raised Catholic, Roman Catholic.
Me too.
Yeah. And of course, I'm not supposed to go outside of the church for information. And as a matter of fact, I'm not even supposed to go to anybody else, but let's say maybe the priest or my parents for guidance and information and so forth. And so that whole aspect of going within and listening to that still small voice is slowly chipped away at. But I think that for most of us, even though we have had that quote unquote training or programming, if you will, we still know deep down inside, no, that's not right. Okay, I'm gonna follow the rules to go along to get along, but I know there's still something not right. I still know that I'm hearing that voice and so forth. And so privately, in certain situations, we think we're rebelling. We think we're misbehaving when in fact we're doing anything but rebelling and misbehaving. Do you find that that is a challenge when you are working with people, especially in your psychotherapy sessions, but also in some of the classes and as well as workshops I'm sure that you hold, training sessions and coaching sessions, that is sort of like the first hurdle that you need to facilitate the participants getting over is that, no, you weren't wrong, you were misinformed, kind of thing.
Yes. Going back to the 60s, we had one of the Chicago Seven, Rennie Davis, he was at Oberlin College. And when I was at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and I was minoring in Buddhist studies at Smith College. And he came out and he spoke to about 10,000 of us because it was in the heart of the Vietnam War. And one of the things that he said that seared into my consciousness was that all rebellion is creativity. And a rebellious act is a creative act. And again, rebellion is creativity because when you rebel against the fixedness, the rigidities, the conformities, the things are done this way. Like when I consult to corporations, and as soon as I pick up on the culture where, well, we do things this way, or we've always done things this way, that's a red alert immediately for, oh my God, we're really deep into rigidity and fixed mindsets here in this corporate cultural speak. And so one has to break that up and free that up to more fluidity, because it's in, there's a book by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. It's a big, long Czechoslovakian name called Flow. And he's a creativity professor somewhere in Chicago. And he says that when you encourage children to act differently, and he's not saying act out as in bad behavior, but to act differently, to be differently. I don't know who came up with the slogan. It might have been Werner Erhard from the S training in the 70s, be all you can be. And then the U.S. Army adopted it as one of their commercials, their slogan. Remember that? But I think it really came out of the S training, where they were really emphasizing that creative transformation comes from breaking things up. And I say often, if it isn't broken, break it apart, whatever it is. However, don't throw everything away, because whatever you break up, there's going to be some really jewels in the formula there. However, you can, as a core creative, you could reorganize and then reinvent, building upon some of those core parts, but eliminating and isolating and getting rid of the parts of your life, yourself, your relationship, the way you you communicate, the way you live creatively or you don't live creatively, and come up and invent a new formula that is more fluid and that listens to your dreams. It listens to that inner reverie of your creative unconscious. Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist who is the grandfather of spiritual psychology from Zurich, Switzerland, and he created Jungian psychology. It was a breakaway because he had a dream when he and Sigmund Freud were on a boat going from Europe to Boston, because they were both invited to go to Tufts University and to lecture. And they would share dreams at breakfast in the morning. And Jung was Freud's student, and then moving into being his peer. And Jung told Freud that he had dreamt the night before that Freud had died. And Freud's interpretation, of course, being very psychoanalytic, was that you have murderous envy and rage and you want to kill the father. and Jung, on the other hand, said, oh, no. I think the dream means that I'm going to be breaking away from you and creating something new that I don't even know what I'm going to be creating. And if you look at the volume of Carl Jung's work, it's voluminous. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of books on dreams and memories and symbols and etc. Mm-hmm. So breaking it apart and being free to act freely in a rebellious way so that you can invent and create the future is very, very important.
Yeah, the first thought that came to my mind was, well, no, actually, Freud is going to, a part of him is going to die, not literally or physically, but he's going to, his old self, the old way he was thinking is going to die off, and a new Freud is going to come along. That was the first thing that came to my mind in terms of growth, transformation, which is really what we're all about.
That's right. Absolutely. You're so right. And I wanted to share with you, before we run out of time, just a couple of quotes from the book. And most of the listeners will probably know that the one of the most creative singer-songwriters, musicians, lead guitarists in American rock and roll history is Robbie Robertson of the band. Mm-hmm. And this is what he says about creativity. Creativity comes from the womb of emptiness. It comes from the trunk of your imagination. So creativity comes from the womb of emptiness. And what he means by that is you really have to spend time just being in the unknown, being in the void, mm-hmm. being in territory that you don't know. He also says it comes from the trunk of your imagination, which includes your history. And he says you write about where you've traveled, who you've met along the road, places that you've been. And most of the band members, other than Levon Helm, they were all Canadians. But because their first assignment pre-Bob Dylan was Ronnie Hawkins of the Hawks, they were the backup band for Ronnie Hawkins, and Robbie Robertson at age 16 started writing songs for Ronnie Hawks and took over and became the lead guitarist. And so they traveled all through the South, through dive bars, through the Delta, and they used all of that so that when they get to Woodstock, after they had toured with Bob Dylan for 4 or 5 years, they get to Woodstock, and of course Dylan's in Woodstock also, but he's working on his own. He kind of went country for a couple of years back then. Mm-hmm. And they invent because they spend a couple of years in this house called the Big Pink, and they go downstairs into the basement every day to write, to jam, to play. And you get on that first record of the band, it's a masterpiece. And you get a song like The Weight, which takes you through like this story, this allegory of travels through of the South. And you realize all of that imagery, and all of that ideas and all those memories and all that history, it's all coming through in the band's music. And another great masterpiece that the band created that Levon Helm and Robbie set together while Robbie then went off to write the song, is the song "The Night They Drove All Dixie Down."
Mm-hmm.
You grasp, through Levon's story, about the pain and the suffering, regardless of who was right or who was wrong in that conflict,
Mm-hmm.
horror that was inflicted.
Yeah.
All these young men, they took the very best,
Yeah. And that's interesting because I've heard that song many, many times. I've known what it was about,
Mhm.
and I was not taken to side with anybody. I was taken by the brutality, the horror, the sadness of the death of they took the very best
Yes.
in that respect. And of course the same thing with even modern day conflicts. But that was a war amongst ourselves, kind of like, the Irish. They'll fight Monday through Friday, Saturday go to the pub, Sunday go to confession.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I picked up on that as well, and there are other songs that kind of speak to that kind of thing.
Well, like the U2's song 40,
Mhm.
about the Sunday Bloody Sunday. Well, that's another song of theirs, but 40 is also about the protracted 1,000-year-old conflict between the British in the northern and the Protestants, between the Catholics in Northern Ireland, and the lyrics of how long must we sing this song? How long, how long, how long? And fortunately, over the years, whether it was in Bosnia, the U2 has repeatedly sung that song.
Yeah.
And I'm sure when they go on tour next, the Ukraine conflict, here we are once again
Yeah.
in history. But, the Germans desecrated the Russian people and destroyed the country, trying to take them over in the Second World War and the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
And then here we find ourselves back in history where the Russians are repeating. Putin is becoming Stalin, and he's repeating the same lessons that apparently were not learned by trying to take over the Ukraine. So, 40, how long must we sing this song? How long?
I say this with all due respect to those who have served, regardless of country or nationality, but all the soldiers who have died in all of the conflicts that we've been involved in for centuries, they've all died in vain because we're still fighting.
Yes.
The day we stop fighting is the day that they will have not died in vain. And that's just an observation on my part. Again, no disrespect to anybody who chooses to or who has served and died in those conflicts. They made their choices. It's what they felt they needed to do. We hope they went with their conscience. They listened to that voice saying, "Hey, I need to do this." Okay, that's wonderful, and I'm, not passing judgment at all. We all make choices. It's just when you take a look at the totality of human history, it's like, when are we going to learn? When are we going to get the message that it never resolves anything? Because there's always going to be somebody that's going to say, I want what I want and I want it now. And I remember when the war first started, God, I can't believe it's almost a year ago. And my first thought that went through my mind was, if I had the wherewithal, I would buy a plane ticket to Moscow. I would fly over there. I would land there in Moscow. I would walk straight into the Kremlin saying, "No, get away. No, you're not going to stop me." I'd walk along that 40-foot table to the end and grab him by the ear and say, "Young man, no. Your mother would be ashamed of you. We do not play this way in the 21st century. You get a permanent timeout. You're going to spend the rest of your days behind bars for these atrocities, and because I don't want the man killed, okay, but that's contrary to really what we're all about. But there are consequences for our actions. We have to be responsible for the choices that we do make, and that. But that was my thing, and I shared that with one of my listeners. She says, "Well, once you do that, you let me know. I'll go with you."
Yeah. Well, many historians have done the biopsy on like what really brought the Berlin Wall down in 1989.
Mhm.
And on a surface level, many people say, well, it was Ronald Reagan, his statement, his speech in Berlin, Chairman Gorbachev, tear down that wall. And of course, the U.S. Saying that they had this Star Wars system that was going to kind of out Star Wars the Russian missile system, and it was a way of kind of like causing the Russian economy to just go to hell in a handbasket. But other historians, and particularly people in the music industry I've consulted with, all say the same thing, and I think it's more seminal, and that's the wall came down because music went through the wall for all the decades that the wall was up. The music, particularly rock and roll and Western music, was piercing through the wall. The music of the Beatles, All You Need Is Love, Jai Guru Deva, John Lennon's music, All We Are Saying, Give Peace a Chance. That when the music went through the wall, symbolically, the wall could no longer stay in place.
It's kind of like the metaphorical equivalent of what was it? The Battle of Jericho. They blew the trumpets and the walls came down.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And I could not agree with you more on that. We're talking with Dr. Ronald Alexander. He has a book that we would love for you to get a hold of by going to his website or Amazon if you'd like, corecreativity.com, and Core Creativity, The Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self. We hope that you'll get yourself a copy. Go to his website as well, and corecreativity.com. We will be linked to your website, Doctor, so that folks can get in touch with you as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I, first of all, would like to thank you for giving us so much time here on the program. I know that each person that we have on this program has a schedule they have to keep and things they have to do, places they have to go, people they have to see, that kind of thing. But we thank you for giving us this time.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. It's been a pleasure. It's a joy to have this exchange with you.
Well, I've enjoyed it. I hope we can get together again to continue the conversation and
Anytime.
more creativity. By the way, one point, this was shared with me some years ago in a program I went through called Omega and Delta Vector, created by a gentleman by the name of George Adair, not the famous one. This guy was a printer. He had a printing company called Papago Printing in Phoenix, Arizona. But by the way, I have a connection with Earhart in that I went through a program similar in early 1980s called LifeSpring.
Oh, yes. I know that. Yeah.
I went through all three levels. Anyway, in some of the conversations that George would have at these monthly Monday meetings, I called them booster shots, for the philosophy he was teaching about from Teilhard Chardin and so forth about the 0 point. He would ask the question. He asked the question. He says, "Who do you think the most creative people are in the world?" And a lot of people came up with wonderful answers. Architects, engineers, painters, sculptors, da-da-da. No, those are not the most creative people in the world. They are creative.
Yeah.
But the most creative people in the world are criminals because they do not acknowledge that the existing rules for living in society either exist, let alone apply to them. And so they're going to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm not advocating that all those in this room become criminals, but we can take bits and pieces of the way they process information, if you will, in their creative endeavors, if you want to put it in that context, to do what it is each of us is here to do, our life's purpose, if you will, following the still small voice and so forth. And I thought that was really fascinating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's been a real delight. And if we have just one 30-second piece, I just would love to just share with your listeners so that, maybe in their own time later, they can pull up and listen to the lyrics from the Song of the Weight. I can't pull it up right now, but I try to.
That's right.
But just listen to the metaphors and the allegory of that beautiful song. It's a guide into one's core creativity. All the best to you, and I'll come back anytime.
Okay, I have 3 final questions that I ask all of my guests at the end of the interview, and I will punch them through fairly quickly for you. You can, keep them brief or expand upon them as you wish. But we are celebrating our 15th anniversary this year, this last quarter of 2022, and we have made some interesting adjustments to those questions over the years. So the first of those 3 questions is, who is Ronald Alexander?
I'm a seeker. I'm an adventurer. I'm a core creative, and I'm very soulful, and I'm kind and compassionate.
What is your life's purpose?
To be as creative and mischievous and inventive as and mystically sparkling as I can be.
I love mischievous. That's wonderful.
To reduce suffering. To reduce suffering.
And the final question, what was your best day?
The best day I ever had was in May 1970. I was asked to give a speech at my junior college in Boston after the Kent State massacre. And I gave it. I stayed up all night long writing this speech. It was the first real public speech I ever gave. And there was like 2,000 students in the auditorium. And when it ended, they stood up and they applauded, standing ovation for about like 5 minutes. I've never had a high like that ever again.
Wow.
It was just unbelievable, and because I was just so connected creatively to what I had written and the sentiment and the feeling about this horrendous, terrible crime that had been committed by, our own National Guard, our own government against us students. It was just an exhilarating and overwhelmingly high point in my life.
Well, again, thank you so much for giving us so much time, and we look forward to having you back in the not too distant future to continue this conversation. And I would like to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, as we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal and Jeanette, I am listening.